ecological transformation, the role of alternative economic forms, and the need for planning. We have 3 speakers. I go quick and introduce the first one, who is Vasilis Kostakis, Professor of Technology, Governance and Sustainability at Tallin University of Technology and Faculty Associate at Harvard University's Berkman Klein Center. He will present work on beyond Techno-Solutionism, digital commons and solidarity economies for a sustainable future. Vasilis shows in this work a paradox. Can technologies that may worsen the green solutions, the high-tech solutions, truly solve the problems, or maybe are part of the problems? So, Vasilis, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this.
Recording in progress.
I suppose we can hear me. And without further ado, I would like to discuss the real question that is, every good research question is an existential question. So this is the main question that I would like to address, to be or not to be. And if our reply to this question is a resounding to be, then the next research question that needs to be addressed is how to address global wealth inequality and ecological collapse, this twofold problem. And very roughly and briefly speaking, there are different plans that have been proposed to address this twofold question. I'm going to discuss on 2 and focus on the latter, Plan B. So Plan A, again, very roughly speaking, is this idea of green growth or eco-modernism. That is to say, modern technology, and especially high technologies, high tech, can address the problem. So technology can allow our economies to grow, our gross domestic product to grow, while the environmental breakdown becomes less and less. So we realize this absolute sufficient decoupling of economic growth and environmental growth. The thing that we have to very honestly discuss and explore is whether this is possible, this idea of green growth is possible. So far, actually all of the empirical evidence that we have showcases that it is not. That is to say, we have no case study, no country in the world that has realized absolute sufficient decoupling, that is green growth. There are many reasons about that, but one could say that one of the main reasons is because in order to have green Stockholm, green Copenhagen, Athens, whatever, we need to have some green sacrifice zones. So it is this idea of green extractivism, this practice actually of green extractivism that so far has made our efforts to realize green growth futile. Now, although green growth remains a political possibility, I don't have any personal problem against green growth. I would wish green growth to be a possibility, but unfortunately so far it has not been realized. So we believe that me and my research group and many other colleagues believe that we have to come up with a plan B, because what if it is never realized? And here comes the main focal area of this talk. So this plan B has at its epicenter, it is based on the commons, these social systems in which communities co-manage and co-develop their goods and resources. So the idea of the commons and the branches of the commons, as you know, is very old. From the first human societies, we have commons-based systems of governance. But recently, within the realm of software, we have been witnessing a rekindling of the commons, praxis, and the commons political economy as a powerful force to influence our new modes of production. For example, we have many free and open source software projects that have been serving as the backbone of our so-called digital economy. For example, this is a master machine. This is one of the top 500 supercomputers in the world. And today, all of them, the top 500 supercomputers, run on free and open source software. That is to say, software that has been produced from each according to their abilities to each according to their needs. So new forms of property, new forms of governance have been celebrated in the realm of free and open source software. There are many different business models that have been implemented, but they have post-capitalist, if you will, tendencies, non-negligible post-capitalist tendencies or potentialities. Now, this commons-based mode of production has also been influencing the realm of hardware, and here some case studies that we have carefully explored. For example, and I'm going to start with an example from the prosthetics industry. These are designs of a prosthetic hand that have been designed by a geographically distributed community of scientists, designers, and enthusiasts, and hackers. So, all designs and knowledge and software related to the manufacturing of such prosthetic hands are available as a global Insta Commons. So, anyone with the support of an expert, with access to localized makerspaces, to a low-cost 3D printer, can customize and locally manufacture these prosthetic hands. Now, I would like to say a bit more on this case because it illustrates the different technological options that we have. So, on the one polarity, we have one extreme that is high-tech. So, we have this prosthetic hand, which on the one hand, on the one side, it allows for sophisticated grips, but at the same time, it has a high ecological footprint. You can see a lot of actuators, cables, cobalt, nickel, etc. And it costs a lot, like 20K, for example. Now, and because these prosthetic hands, the high-tech ones, they cost a lot and they break down easily. So if they break down, then you need a lot of money and access to an expert to maintain them, to fix them. On the daily lives, on the everyday lives, most of the amputates would prefer using low-tech hands, like a hook. The design and the maintenance is obvious. It is low, it has a low ecological footprint, but it does not allow for the amputee, for example, to hold a cup of tea. So most of the amputees would prefer using the high-tech prosthetic hands, in public ceremonies, celebrations, whatever. Now, in this case of the open source prosthetic hands, which are commons-based, we could understand this mode of technology, this technological artifact, as mid-tech, because it synthesizes some good aspects of the high-tech. So, the internet is a high-tech element, you need CAD software in order to design them, and you need 3D printers. But there are also low-tech elements. It has no electronics because of a low-tech approach in its design. The motive here is not to maximize profits. There is no planned obsolescence. It has almost zero minerals. It uses kinetic energy. It is hard for me to explain this specific aspect right now because I was there. Anyway, it would be more effective. But anyway, the idea is that because this is open source, it can localize. It can localize its manufacturing. You can customize that. For example, you can scan your one hand that is functional and then manufacture locally and customize the other processed car, and you can maintain that at a fraction of the cost. So this version, for example, it allows for the same amount of grips like the high-tech counterpart, but it costs something like 500 to 600 euros compared to the 20 or 15K. Now, we have also other cases of commons-based hardware production, like small-scale farmers who rarely find appropriate machinery to support their work. So there are communities, cooperatives that design global and manufacture local their small-scale agricultural machinery. We have small-scale renewables, and we even have satellites. This is actually the first open-source satellite in orbit, designed globally and manufactured locally by the Greek, the Athens-based Hackerspace, and now open source technology for space exploration is named LibreSpace, and it is an NGO based in Athens. So if we have to visualize this emerging mode of production, we could say that at the center we have this digital commons of design, knowledge, and software. We have small-scale, locally oriented communities, cooperatives, social enterprises, community-driven makerspaces. All of these communities have access to some basic manufacturing facilities. They can have different focal areas. For example, you can have a makerspace, as we're going to see later, focused on agricultural machines, another focused on producing equipment for biology, chemistry, energy, etc. So these entities, they may be small scale, locally oriented, but at the same time they are globally connected. So they do not scale up in the typical capitalist understanding of scaling, but they do scale wide, or they scale out their mode of production through the digital commons, through digital economy. And to become more concrete, I would invite you to visit my area. So right now I'm based in this place, in Yanina. So based on some elements that exist in my area, we have been trying to do a lot of participatory action research. Some of these elements that I'm going to talk about do exist. They are mature enough. Some of them, they are in a nascent format, and some others could be developed. They do exist in other parts of the country or in Europe, but not here. So, for example, I'm going to start with a local energy community, an energy cooperative, which I belong. And not only me, but other people also, and other organizations from our city, and also from the wider Ioannina region, belong to this energy community, energy cooperative. I suppose you know what is an energy community. I don't have enough time to explain. So it is this energy cooperative. So we self-produce our energy through this energy community. Now, there are some makerspaces whose the makerspace itself is a member of this energy community. We have makerspace and co-working spaces in the rural areas of Ioannina, and to get a better idea about how these makerspaces look like, let's pay a visit to my home village in Zumerica. So this is the makerspace of Kalezi. This makerspace is based in the cultural center of the area. So there people would gather, local farmers and other local people, to identify their needs, engineers, whatever. They don't have every time to reinvent the wheel. So if they need to produce a certain tool, there is some participatory design, and they're going to look on the internet, on the existing global digital commons, to find the solution that they need. They can customize the solution is open source, and they are going to localize the manufacturing, so less transportation of materials, better maintenance, and many other things. This is, for example, an aromatic grinder produced by jewel makers for a fraction of the cost compared to a commercial one, or a small-scale wind turbine. Just 20 kilometers away from Jamaica, we have another, actually the first global the first intercultural makerspace globally, just built opposite to a local refugee camp. So, for example, this is this wooden construction that you see is a recording studio facility produced in this makerspace situated in an abandoned wood-making factory. Another 15 kilometers away from Jumeirah, we have this makerspace, and this is also not, this makerspace is a nomadic also makerspace, as you're going to see later by the Naples Group. This is an NGO. An NGO consists of engineers, architects, etc. They try to maintain the local knowledge around the local architecture, the traditional knowledge, vernacular buildings, vernacular technologies, and through schools, etc., they try to maintain the local infrastructure while communicating this almost lost knowledge to the next generation. We have the High Mountains. This is a social cooperative, another cooperative in the region that is based in the abandoned primary school of the Zavori area. So they have a rural co-working space, they have a support center for mountain living. And if I have 2 minutes, do I have 2 minutes more?
Yes, you have 5 minutes.
Okay, great, thank you. So now I would like to discuss a concrete example to see how all these initiatives about which I have provided you with a bird's eye view, how they can create a local ecosystem with the support of the state or the local government. So, for example, I live in an area on the mountains, a lot of rainfalls, and thus a lot of rivers. And if we have a lot of rivers, then we have, or we used to have, water rivers. Now, most of them are abandoned. So, a village in the Jumeirah area of the wider Ioannina region, Naples, we came actually in contact with them so that we can renovate this abandoned water mill and turn it into a small-scale hydroelectric power facility. And this facility will be part of the energy community that I talked before. So, let's say that we have the local government, the municipality, along with the local regional government, let's say, supporting the restoration of this abandoned water mill. So we would have a public commons partnership. So all these maker spaces and initiatives that I talked about, they will join forces, and this is actually a work in progress, to restore, to renovate this small-scale windmill and have the energy produced by this water mill to be consumed by the local community, by the local village. Through such a state support, we believe that local societies and these forms of common-based ecosystems could be empowered and flourish. So, thank you very much. Yeah, I hope I was on time.
Thank you, Vasilis. Maybe the questions at the end, as in the previous session. Is it okay for you? So, let's go to the second speaker, Stefan Lendorf, economist, is a research fellow at the Institute for Work Skills and Training in Germany, where he has worked as the head of the Department of Working Time and Work Organization, dealing with the problems of European integration, industrial relations system, and trade union strategies, and more recently strategies for socio-ecological transformation. The title of his presentation is Next Generation EU, a window of opportunity that may soon close. Stefan, if you manage to Okay, you have 20 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm talking about the Next Generation EU program, which has been addressed, as you may know, in this year's EuroMemo already. I'm going to talk about it in a slightly different angle. We're picking up some ideas already mentioned by Maria and Leo. I would like to focus on the aspect of the NGEU program as a window of opportunity for member states. That, however, may soon close or soon be closed. The NGEU program, with its core element, the recovery and resilience, is it my fault? Oh yeah, I'm too close. The Recovery and Resilience Facility, RRF, is, as you may know, the largest EU investment program ever. It lasts until 26, end of next year. The overall volume will most probably amount to roughly 650 billion euros, out of which 55% will be spent as grants to the member states. It's based on joint borrowing, de facto euro bonds, which has been made politically possible exclusively by the COVID crisis. An interesting, very important aspect of RRF is that 37% of the money spent by the member states, the plans, the national plans, must be spent on so-called green issues and 20% on digitalization. And the governments have to submit spending plans to the European Commission. These spending plans, they are called National Recovery and Resilience Plans, NRRP, must be based on so-called milestones and targets related to the areas of investment, plus the country-specific recommendations of the EU Commission. The EU Commission calls it as a success model, is it okay? Performance-based budgeting. And the project I'm talking about, talking too loud. I'm not spitting into the microphone. I'm just putting the... Okay, so I'm a bit distracted. Okay. The project I'm talking about is about, or has been about, a very simple question. What is the money actually being spent on in the member states? It was a project funded by the European left-wing foundation Transform Europe, based on 6 country studies. It's not important. You take a look at that report, which has been published a couple of days ago. 6 country studies, and of course, as the NGEU is a still running project, everything which is written there, most of it, it just provides some intermediate insights, but I think one can learn already a lot of it. Just to give an example of the importance, the economic importance of the RRF, or the Next Generation EU, if you take a look at our sample of 6 countries, and just to take a look at the right column, because the grants are the most important part. Many countries don't like the loans, they just take the grants from the Commission. If you look at Denmark, the grants amount to less than 1.5%. whereas in Spain it's more than 5% of GDP. So it's an enormous gap in economic importance across the member states, and if you like, within our sample, Denmark and Spain may be regarded as the antipodes. And just to give you another flavor, the importance of green spending. And this is what I'm talking about primarily. As a percentage of green spending as a percentage of the RRF, or the National Recovery and Resilience Plan, the respective ones. And you see again, the minimum was 37%. Spain is slightly above this threshold with 40, and Denmark against antipode at a level of 69% of projects labeled as green. And there are many interesting observations in our country studies about what green spending actually is. And of course, some of it just serves as filling gaps in public budgets of the member states. They shift money from one budget to the other, from the national budget to the EU budget. For instance, Germany, my favorite country to be criticized. Germany, we used to have a national program of general subsidies for people who buy an electric car. A couple of years ago, it was stopped, that program was stopped, and then NGU came and replaced, in a way, the old program by a new one, which gears at selective promotion for purchasing of electric cars by companies. So it's just a shift and a reduction of the program. A very impressive example is given by Italy. The Italian government encourages municipalities to apply for EU funds in the framework of the National Recovery and Resilience Plan. Once the municipalities are successful and get money from the EU, the national government will cut the financial allocations they give to that municipality. It's quite an incentive. But on the other side, there are also many examples, also in Italy, by the way, to some extent, but not primarily. There are many examples for useful projects that made sense within a strategy of ecological transformation. Railway networks, expanding railway networks, the decarbonization of public transport, in particular urban public transport, the promotion of energy efficiency in buildings, the promotion of renewable energy supply, the promotion of green investment in manufacturing industries, and so on. So many useful projects being funded out of the RRF. In all countries, but, well, some make a better job than others. And there are also some, if not too many, examples of a strategic connection of green investment in industrial policy, which is an issue which was really highlighted in the latest EuroMemo. I just take a look at the two antipodes, Spain and Denmark. In Spain, the government initiated a program which was called Panteion, Strategic Projects for Economic Recovery and Transformation, which is geared to establish and promote networks of public bodies and private companies, large companies, small companies, geared to develop technological innovation, in areas such as e-mobility, hydrogen production and storage, industry, decarbonization, circular economy. So parent networks, public-private networks, if you like. It's really new territories for the Spanish government, but also for the Spanish economy. A more advanced example is given by Denmark. The Danish government had a couple of years before the NGO program already established the so-called innovation fund, the same similar idea to the Panteion in Spain. So innovation fund to promote public-private networks, in particular research institutions with private companies. And this network, these networks and this innovation fund could be enlarged by the means of the Next Generation EU fund. So they have promoted strategic ecological projects, recycling, flexibility of electricity grids, but also questionable ones such as carbon storage, which was very, very well debated. And as in other countries, there's a lot of green labeling, various subsidies. But if we look at it, at the Danish example, there are pros and cons, but they give an example of a strategic investment program at the national level, focused on ecological innovation, which has been enlarged by the NGO, which gave the Danish government the possibility to extremely efficiently use of the European money, which is quite extraordinary. So this is why we call our report a window of opportunity for the member states. To what extent and how they use it depends primarily on the governments of the member states. Of course, there are some major shortcomings. In the EuroMemo, this year's EuroMemo, there is the reflection on the importance of the country-specific recommendations as a possible shortcoming or stumbling block. And our finding is a bit more, say, differentiated, because we found that the CSR, country-specific recommendations, have become, over the past 10 years, say, much more contradictory and fuzzy, to some extent, which gives much more leeway for the member states to deal with it. But in fact, the CSR proved to be, to some extent, a stumbling block, because it makes the whole procedure much more complicated than it should be. So the first stumbling block is the very tight time frame that hampers infrastructure investments. The complex procedure takes time, which is desperately needed, in particular for large infrastructure projects that need a couple of years, several years, to be developed and then put into practice. And also, the example of Panteion in Spain demonstrate that if a government tries to explore new territories, they need time for that. So the tight time frame of the NGO, the RF, is the first shortcoming and hurdle, if you like. But of course, it's only relevant when ambitious projects are really on the agenda of the respective government. The second hurdle, I have 10 minutes, right?
6 minutes.
6? Oh, okay. My watch is doing a very bad job. Anyway. A lack of cross-country projects. There are only very few cross-country industrial policy projects, beyond the important projects of common European interest. which means, for instance, if there are deficiencies in one country, these deficiencies hamper the implementation of related projects in neighboring countries. Again, deficiency in Germany has hampered projects in Denmark. What is needed is a mutual connection of cross-country infrastructure investment projects with longer-term EU funding, which is needed for planning and implementation of infrastructure projects. Third hurdle, involvement of social actors. It's really one of the most important shortcomings. In most countries, there is hardly any, if at all, involvement of social actors, in particular of trade unions. In Denmark, unions are quite happy with the information they get, which is quite something already. The only outlier in our sample is Poland, surprisingly enough. They are latecomers because they had to start very late with their program, and the government involved social actors from the beginning, the development of the national program, which is quite extraordinary. And I think it's a tip of an iceberg, because democratic involvement is one of the fundamental preconditions for any medium and longer term social and ecological transformation. And the fourth shortcoming is the lack of conditionalities. For instance, well, both ecological and social conditionalities. Social conditionalities must be safeguarding of jobs, creation of jobs, and compliance with labor standards, both national and EU labor standards. And neither at the EU level nor at national levels, in any of our 6 countries, they have any of these conditionalities. And this points at a very fundamental problem, which is, this is why I'm making some little advertising for this, which is discussed in a recent publication, online publication of a group of experts, co-edited by Werner Ratzer, who unfortunately cannot take part in our conference today. And I think one has to be aware of the problem that ecological and social conditionalities have to become a must for any public subsidies and industrial policy. But again, the lack of conditionalities at EU level is very regrettable and has to be criticized. But it's no barrier for member states. So to summarize, the experience of the NGO points at the importance of strategic planning, both at EU level and member state level, for a connection between industrial policy and ecological infrastructure investment. And it equally points at the importance of the promotion of what in this book of Werner Ratzer et al. Is called green future markets, through subsidies connected with conditionalities and the regulation of markets, both conditionalities and regulation, both sides of one coin. When a state, the government wants to create future green markets. Matsukato in that book calls the state a co-creator of markets, which I think is a very intelligent approach. So as we have seen, the NGO has opened doors, that whether or not and how member states use these doors depends on the policy approach of the member states. And what is the big challenge now, this window of opportunity is about to be closed. And there is an upcoming controversial debate about whether or not should be some sort of follow-up. I won't go into the quotes. They are very interesting ideas and statements about this in the Draghi report. This says the use of a common safe asset has a well-established precedent in the funding of the EU. The Brussels-based Bruegel Institute has published a very, very intelligent and helpful report about the need to create the follow-on project. And of course, the European Trade Union Conference says also there must be a follow-up project. But as we all know, and as was discussed already, the chances of a follow-up are not very good due to primarily these three reasons. There is a resistance of the Frugal Alliance, led by Germany, Austria, the Netherlands, and other usual suspects, such as the Nordics. The rightward shift across the EU, and the upcoming priority of military spending over social and ecological expenditures. And this is all the more threatening because massive public investment is required to meet the climate targets. And it appears to be, to most people, and to some researchers as well, as a conflict, a political conflict, that is far away, that is in Brussels. I would say no. If this window of opportunity is to be kept open, it has to become a struggle that is fought out at home in our countries. And if you want to take a look at the report, here it is. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Now the first speaker is Sophie Elias Panteion, who is a PhD student in economics at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Her main field of research is political economy, trying to understand the limitations of contemporary capitalism and exploring different alternatives to capitalism. Her most recent work focused on social reproduction and care work in a democratically planned economy. The presentation has the title, What Kind of Plan for the Socio-ecological Transformation? Thank you. You have 10 minutes.
Great. Thank you a lot, Stefan, and thank you, Vasilis, for both of your presentations. And I think it will tie in very well with Stefan's presentation. My talk is called What Kind of Planning for the Socio-ecological Transformation? So, the ecological crisis does promise to limit future growth opportunities and also to foster inequalities within and between countries. And it's likely to exacerbate geopolitical tensions that we already see now. Unfortunately, market forces have failed, and they continue to fail to tackle ecological issues. And so green finance and other green labeled enterprises, they harness ecological issues to generate profits, but they bring very little improvement in climate change mitigation, biodiversity enhancement, and adaptation. And so, despite efforts from the state to channel private action, the so-called anarchy of production makes it impossible to coordinate towards specific goals. And so in this context, an increasing number of people recognize the need to plan, meaning to coordinate economic action in order to reach specific goals. And so in this context, planning becomes a sort of once named New Messiah. And several people reclaim the legacy of planning, but from very different perspectives. Just a few publications in the last years on the top. And so a proposal gaining momentum at the moment is that of green indicative planning, or green economic planning, which we could term of indicative and corporatist planning done by a green developmental state, or big green state in a capitalist context. A recent article summarizes this proposal pretty well. So the idea is to bring about a new form of statecraft which implements structural complementarities between financial infrastructures, industrial policy, and existing private sector capabilities. And I feel like it does relate really much to what Stefan presented. And what I'm doing today is to explain to you why, basically to present the issues that I have with this approach. And it's based on the idea, this proposal is based on the idea that we should get inspired also by corporations' ability to plan, by states' ability to plan that they have shown during wartime planning and in the post-war period, and also from corporate planning. And so it's also by current planning done by states like Denmark on a sectoral level. And so the idea is that if they can plan, we can plan, and also that we should learn from their tools. And so I agree that we need economic planning, so I disagree with this specific approach, and this is what I'll present towards the rest of my presentation. And I will explain why I think that the planning we need has to be independent from corporate power, it has to be deliberative, and it has to be democratic. And I hope to open up discussions with you in the following days on this matter. So to start with, I believe we can't imagine channeling private corporate planning abilities because their interests lie opposite to the ecological transition. And so already in 2019, Tong and their colleagues highlighted that the use of fossil fuel burning energy infrastructures for their expected lifetime implied committed CO2 emissions that would bring us beyond the 1.5 degree target. And so if we are to limit the lifetime of these infrastructures, this represents a large depreciation of current assets for fossil companies, but also for other industries like cement and steel production. And so Simioniuk and his colleagues estimated in 2022 the value of these stranded assets to be $1.4 trillion US. And so it's clear that any ambitious sustainability transformation is likely to face significant corporate opposition as the interests of major corporations lie against the ecological transition and in the status quo. So this would not be a deal breaker if we considered that the corporations we plan to work with, so-called green capital, considered itself very different from fossil capital with different interests. But actually, green and fossil capital are entangled in multiple ways. Not only are they, the people involved in both sectors, highly connected, they also share common interests in financial stability and in general conditions for profitability, which are likely to be greatly affected by any ambitious climate action. And so for these reasons, a strong-arm planning approach by states is likely to face significant corporate opposition, even from the green arms of corporations and the business associations involved in the green sector. So before that, to conclude this, even if green planning aims to depart from the framework of a de-risking state, the idea still relies on the idea that there is a middle ground between where we can still meet climate targets while reducing profit opportunities, but still by keeping them high enough to appease corporate power power and to convince corporations to stay in the country or stay in the EU and continue investing here. So I would argue that this is not realistic and that any attempt to conduct a sustainable transformation needs to aim primarily at curbing corporate power. So then if we cannot count on using this planning ability directly by convincing them to follow sustainability objectives, some people claim that policymakers should still try to learn from corporate planning in order to be able to do it themselves. And corporations do plan in a variety of ways. They plan within and beyond ownership. They acquire the necessary knowledge to inside and beyond their business structures in order to shape outcomes, to shape the labor process on the one hand and to shape markets on the other to ensure profitability. And yes, it's important to know what tools already exist to plan. But aiming to get inspired by corporate planning suggests that the issue at hand is largely a technical issue, that we need to understand how firms plan so that once we reclaim or repurpose the means of control over the means of control, that we know how to use them. But the thing is, corporate planning techniques are shaped by capitalist constructs. And not only are they aimed at maximizing profits and shareholder value, which of course is not to be our main concern, but they also work in and through monetary valuations. And we know that corporations decide on courses of action based on future profitability. And so cost-benefit analyses are really the backbone of such an approach. And actually when they consider sustainability issues, it's most often through the lens of increasing costs to raw materials, of market opportunities for sustainable products, or thinking about climate risks. But the decisions that we have to take regarding the socio-ecological transition are of an inherently different nature. They regard balancing different goals, like ecological sustainability, like needs fulfillment, and the reduction and improvement of work, which are valued differently by different actors and all for different reasons. And specifically, when we look at ecological issues, they are extremely complex, they are subject to great uncertainty, and so market prices can help us very little to make decisions about sustainability. And ecological issues are incommensurable, so meaning that the values that different people attribute to the environment have no single denominator. And this means that if we acknowledge that virtually all economic decisions have ecological implications, that these characteristics of ecological issues have to be taken into account in any kind of economic planning. And so this has three implications. First, we need to account for multiple criteria beyond monetary valuation. So taking into account CO2 emissions and material use, but also labor hours, community resilience, and the kinds of precautions taken. Then the articulation of these multiple values cannot be done in a straightforward way by just aggregating costs and benefits together. We need to compare alternative scenarios that cannot be ranked. And so this is what Economies called scenario optimization. And then to choose amongst these options, we need spaces of deliberative negotiation, where local information can be mobilized, where like local knowledge on ecosystems, but also the evaluations of uncertainties related to these ecological issues and the evaluation of different outcomes. So, in other words, the important decisions in ecological planning are based on value judgments and trade-offs, which are inherently political. And so the kind of planning that corporations do within capitalism, they provide us little help in learning how to navigate these. So we just have to seek inspiration elsewhere. And I believe that multi-criteria decision aids that are already being used on ecological issues would be a good place to start. Finally, so proponents of that approach might tell us that corporations are not good examples to follow if we want to learn how to balance ecological goals with varied interests. But that governments during wartime did exactly that, they directed economic activity by balancing the concerns of legitimacy towards the population, the collaboration with enterprises, and the geopolitical goals of the war. And governments were mostly planning in kind, meaning that they accounted for things instead of using monetary valuations. And a commitment to the war effort and a sense of equality of sacrifice kept people motivated and led them to disclose the right information about productive activities. However, these conditions were strictly due to the extreme circumstances of the war. And we also know that central planning in circumstances of reduced commitment leads to the control and manipulation of information. So there's this idea that we could take the opportunity of militarization to reclaim fiscal space, like Hans-Jürgen was highlighting, and the space for intervention for the socio-ecological transformation. And there's also this idea that the urgency of the ecological crisis might justify such wartime-like planning. The thing is, the ecological crisis is unraveling at a very different pace, and its impacts are much more diffuse. So the fact that the ecological crisis will probably not stop anytime soon makes it hard to believe that workers would be ready to accept such an authoritative involvement of the state in production for an indeterminate amount of time. And so if states still centralize power in that context, as the ecological crisis continues to worsen, it risks also further degrading their legitimacy. So, in fact, many argue that the only way of acquiring the legitimacy needed to access the necessary information for planning, but also to be effective, is by making planning more democratic, which is, like Stefan also highlighted. And this is decentralizing when possible, so that decisions are taken directly by those affected by them, and involving the relevant stakeholders in making any central decision that actually relies on central and large-scale coordination. And so if we want to bring democratic planning about, one of the main challenges at hand is that of determining which groups should have a say on which decisions, and this is exactly not what states are doing during wartime. So the idea that wartime planning proves the effectiveness of planning in a capitalist context by authoritative states is actually deceptive, and it diverts our attention from the elements, the issues that are actually urgent to address, which are the ones of accountability, of subsidiarity, and the scale of decision making. And so for inspiration on these issues, I think we should rather turn towards democratically run organizations and large associations like cooperatives, and large cooperatives especially, experiences in participatory budgeting, and citizen assemblies. So to conclude, I believe that the proposal of a green indicative planning within capitalism is not enough, is unlikely to happen in the current context, and it might even be harmful. Rather, a sustainability transformation requires a strong opposition to capital interests, the use of multi-criteria decision-making and deliberative settings, and the decentralization of power and democratic accountability. And so this is why I believe that we have to work on devising new ways of coordinating production through planning in a democratic, decentralized, and participatory way. But luckily, several people have already attempted that, and concrete proposals are multiplying as we speak. And among others, one proposal based on commons, the third from last, so based on commons, aiming to kind of think about a world and an economy based on commons, very alike to what Vasilis presented us. And so I think that all that remains is to build on existing local planning capabilities that exist from the bottom up. Thank you.
Okay, thanks to our speakers. We have time for a couple of questions.
So, hello, my name is from University of Helsinki. My question is for, I guess, all the panelists, and also it relates to the first plenary session. I would argue that beneath this socio-ecological transformation is also a drastic shift in ways in which we account for the value generated. We know that, for example, large-scale diffusion of cooperatives and commons, sort of digital commons, for example, that means that since the GDP in the income approach is a combination of wages, profits, and depreciation of assets, this means that if we are going towards economic model where we have these cooperatives, it means that the GDP growth will be reduced. But luckily there is academic literature existing already that sort of proposes different metrics than GDP, the so-called beyond GDP approach. And for instance, the Stiglitz book from 2011, I guess, sort of discussed also the possibilities of measuring the value created in a ways that account for the socio-economic factors as well, instead of GDP. So my question is that, do you perceive as well that we need to implement different ways to account for the value generated? And then also, how do you see the transformation towards such economic model, meaning that we wouldn't have GDP as the sole metric of growth, but hopefully other socio-economic metrics? Thank you.
Thank you. One of those. Two there. Let's say this.
So, Sophie, on that table, why you don't like corporate planning, or the planning of corporate, you have the cost-benefit analysis and the way they work out. What I would have added to that table is technology, because I think the key thing about corporations is the kind of technology that they will use, so that there is nothing inherent in the technology itself that it should develop to replace workers or to supervise workers, rather than work with the skills of workers and create new jobs and new skills. So one of the reasons why we're against corporate planning is because they have a particular view about technology. And it's not like the left can say, well, it doesn't matter what the technology is, we'll use it for better uses. The technology itself has to be challenged. And that's where I see a link between your paper and the first paper of Vasilis about that whatever planning is about, part of what the content of that planning will be is what kind of technology, who produces it, and for what purposes.
Yes, this is a question for Vasilis. And I love your example about the prosthetic hands, and thanks to you, I'm also using this example in my research. But the problem is that for the moment it doesn't work. I mean, it's incredibly cheaper, it's very relevant, but it doesn't work for many reasons. So how do you, I mean, how do you think it can really scale out, scale wide, concretely for such an example?
Last one there, and then we close because we're running out of time.
My question is also to Sophie. First, I must say that I'm very glad that you destroyed the illusion of indicative green planning. I'm really very happy about that. But at the same time, I really wonder if what you propose can be compatible with capitalism. I'm afraid it is not. And I think that we must, all of us, start rethinking ways to confront the elephant in the room. Because this is the elephant in the room. But we tend to forget that. And in this context, I don't know, well, possibly you have read the article that was published in a New Left Review by Aaron Benanav, who is exactly on the tracks of what you said regarding the necessity of having the democratic planning. The only difference is that his article has the title Beyond Capitalism. So I'm asking you, if you consider what you said, that what you said can be done within the present socio-economic system.
Okay, thanks. Who's starting? Maybe Vasilis?
Are the questions over?
Also, time is almost finished, so please reply.
Okay. Thanks for the question, but I have to highlight that I could barely hear you, so I have some notes. I think that I'm going to address the right questions. If not, do interrupt me, okay? Because I couldn't very well hear the full articulation of the question. Now, regarding the first question on GDP, I fully agree that should the commons become the dominant modality, or in order for the commons to become the dominant modality, the commons, cooperativism, use any term you want, I don't care, we definitely need another metrics. For example, if let's say Greece decides, the public sector of Greece decides to support free and open source software, this means that the GDP increase would not be the same should the Greek state have bought commercial software, for obvious reasons, okay? Or a problem that we have been facing with our own energy community. If the Greek state, for example, would say that for me energy is a commons, is a good, not a commodity first and foremost, this means that, that most energy will be produced through self-producing energy communities. This means that energy production would not have a price at the market, it will not increase GDP. So if the Greek state needs to increase its GDP, definitely it should not understand energy, in this case, as a commons, and not promote energy communities. It is better to promote, as it has been happening during the past years, big companies that understand energy as a commodity, so that you maximize profits, we maximize GDP. Now, on the question about technological sovereignty, definitely I believe that one of the things that this model, these emerging practices, common-based practices that I talked about, they try to develop a form of technology sovereignty. And if we want to have energy sovereignty, food sovereignty, any form of sovereignty, if we want to become sovereign, we need to be technologically sovereign. We need to democratize technology. Technology should not be a black box, and localize what can be localized, and globalize what can be globalized as a digital commons. Now, I couldn't listen the third question, which I think was explicitly aimed at me, sorry. And regarding, you can repeat, but let me also finish with a very small remark about the fourth question about capitalism, etc. The nascent forms of digital commons, they have proved that they have actually introduced new forms of property and new forms of labor. Now, in the realm of free and open source software, for example, which has existed since many years, late 70s, early 20s, it depends. So it's a more mature case. There were some post-capitalist tendencies, socialist tendencies, if you want, but neither the states nor the social movements played a role in the free and open source software movement. So we had the big tech, Google, Microsoft, IBM, most of, if not all of the big tech companies, understanding the dynamics of peer-to-peer way of producing value and corrupting these commons. And right now they are the main donors, the main supporters of digital commoning, at least in the realm of software. There was a window of opportunity, still there is a window of opportunity, but you know, the big tech were the first ones who really realized, well, what is the potentiality from a profit maximization point of view. Now, about the third question, sorry, I couldn't catch it.
Was why doesn't it work? You say all these things are very good, very cheap, but they are not diffused, if I got it correctly. So it was targeting the limitation of what you proposed in your presentation.
What are the limitations? First, there are many contradictions before discussing the limitations. The first and most obvious contradiction is the fact that still commons-based communities, when it comes to technology commons, still they use high-tech. We are based on high-tech technologies which have a high ecological footprint, labor under inhuman conditions in the global south, etc. But at the same time, we believe that they have a kind of reparative function. Take, for example, free and open source software. This can be one of the biggest transfers of value, unconditional transfers of value, from the global north to the global south in human history. So, and not only that, by commodifying high-tech, we need less of them. So, in a community-driven makerspace, for example, we can have one 3D printer or one CNC machine instead of this Silicon Valley dream that every garage turns into an individual makerspace, etc. So, this is a very key contradiction. There are many other problems because, for example, and I'm going to finish with that because I understand that also other people want to talk. Many, if not all of these making spaces that are based now in my area here in Epirus in Ioannina, they operate in grey zones, legally, for example.
Okay, thank you. Maybe Stefan?
No, maybe
Sophie?
Yes. Thank you for the questions. So first, do we need new units of account? Yeah, should reorient the economy towards the fulfillment of needs instead of just economic growth or just following GDP as this this goal which is quite abstract. And so also the idea that if we want to fulfill needs, we have to define what needs are. And I don't believe there is an objective definition to that. And so one of the main tasks that we have at hand is also to devise ways of collectively determining at different places what needs we want to fulfill, and then or be able to reorient the economy based on that. And I believe also that to account for what is happening in the economy just on a day-to-day basis and to see how it changes, we need also accounting in kind, which is what I also hinted towards during the presentation. So instead of accounting in units of money, in value, in abstract value, as just in monetary units, we have to also account for what is produced, how much materials are being used at which steps, and how much CO2 emissions are done to be able to understand the production processes and the different value chains, or at least the production chains. And one proposal that actually does that quite well, I'll just kind of show you here. One of these proposals here, the cybernetic democratic economic planning, is quite new and it's devised by people. Panteion works on life cycle analysis, which is actually from industrial ecology. And in industrial ecology, we already have many ways to understand production processes and the different material flows that happen throughout it, and to produce every product, how much CO2 it needed, how much also for the transport of it, and all of these things. And so based on this, they propose how we could reuse these technologies actually and ways of accounting mostly to plan the economy and to be able to understand also sustainability issues in that framework. And so if we, maybe on the capitalism question, if we define capitalism or understand it as the generalized dependency on wage labor, then if also I say that one of the main goals of planning should be curbing corporate power, well, we can't fulfill everyone's needs by curbing corporate power by relying solely on capitalist production. And so I do believe that in turn, at the end of the day, I think that to strive for and really fulfill people's needs, we need to get out of capitalism. But the question is, we are not out of capitalism right now. And when we think what kind of planning should we do now, who should do it and to do what, I guess this is what I'm trying to answer. And I think we need to be, also to develop our ability to plan, but I don't believe that states right now have the ability of actually curbing corporate power and to actually manage this sustainability transition. And so I believe that we have to also organize in different ways and to build our planning ability to be able to also organize production processes to fulfill and sustain ourselves and be able to also build a counterpower that is actually able to bear transformation. Yeah. And I think he can also put this one.
Oh, yeah. Just to carry on Sophie's line of argument, Paris. I agree, we have to think beyond capitalism. But if we want to develop a practice towards beyond capitalism, the sad truth is that we have to begin this practice within capitalism. And this is the message of an outspoken reformist. To start that process, it's a process beyond capitalism, to start that process under the conditions of capitalism means to start and think about problems such as the one of stranded assets. Because stranded assets, there are two sides of stranded assets. One side mentioned by Sophie, the old carbon-oriented, carbon-based stuff might become a stranded asset. The other problem of stranded assets is companies invest into new green technologies. For instance, the steel industry is exactly at this point of decision, and they fear that these might become stranded assets if the whole process does not go forward of greening the economy. So there are two different problems of stranded assets. So I give you one example, just to as the English say, to get down to business. In Germany, the car industry and the steel industry, the chemical industry, they all claim, they call for what they call planning security. Planning security. It's a myth, really. All the time they're talking about planning security. At the same time, the car makers, not only the German ones, and also, and particularly at the European level, make a very strong lobbying against the end of combustion engines in the EU in 35. I would say this is the exact opposite to planning security. A very strict end of combustion engines, selling cars with combustion engines in 35 is the best planning security that can have the car makers. It's also very important for the steel industry, which has many implications. For instance, we need less cars in order to meet the climate targets. What does that mean? It means a mobility turn. And not just at the local level, this is discussed everywhere, in big cities level. At the regional level, that's the biggest problem of all. A mobility turn at the regional level with less individual cars. So, to provide for that, you need an infrastructure policy approach and an industrial policy geared to establish such, let's say, flexible mobility offers to the people living in regional areas. That means it's a dual approach at least. Infrastructure investments that are faster than the change on the demand side of the motor industry. So the supply side must be faster than the demand side in a way. That's one aspect of planning security. The other aspect is regulation, such as the end of combustion engines. And this regulation must be imposed on the companies that call for planning security. So if they call for planning security, if they have a good reason to do that, planning security must be imposed on the companies. So this is a practical approach. And whether or not capitalism will deal with it and can, meet these challenges, it's a test, a practical test for capitalism. But the first steps towards that practical test is an infrastructure policy based on plans and this public debate about whether or not certain steps work or do not work, and what has to be improved or changed in order to make it work. So it's a process, the political process or cultural process, that may develop into a test for capitalism, whether or not capitalism can meet these challenges. I think it won't. Capitalism can't meet these challenges, but the practical test necessary in order to win the game, you know. And that's my approach. It's very reformist, I confess, but I'm okay with that. I used to be much more to the left
Okay,
when I was younger.
Thanks again to all the panelists and to you who attended.